Professor, let's. You've recently spent some time in Egypt prior to the past couple of weeks, where, of course, Morsi was more or less led out of office by the military and a massive public protest. Give me a sense of what was happening and what you saw when you were on the ground in Egypt.
I was in Egypt in early June. It was very clear that a big campaign was going on to ask for a recall of President Morsi. He was elected to a 4-year term the previous June in 2012. And there were just an enormous number of people who were very dissatisfied with his performance, both on economic grounds, which I think may have been the most important, but also because he pulled a number of stunts that made him look dictatorial to people, and they were tired of dictatorship. That was why they had the revolution in the first place. So there were young people spreading around these petitions asking Morsi to submit himself to a recall election. And I found the petitions widespread, not only among students and youth, but also older people and working class people. So it seemed to me that there was a lot of dissatisfaction in the country.
And when we've spoken in the past, and particularly in the wake of Mubarak being thrown out, overthrown essentially, the impetus for throwing out Mubarak was similarly, I guess, sort of on two different tracks. One being economic. I mean, I think at that time you had told us there was somewhere around 1,500 strikes leading up in the year to Mubarak's ouster, but also from a sort of a civil society perspective of people who were interested in something more democratic. Is this basically an extension of that? I mean, how has that coalition changed?
Well, I think the same coalition of youth workers, factory workers, and office workers that was primarily responsible for deposing President Mubarak in 2011 came back together to depose Morsi in June of 2012. I think the students and the youth intellectuals were concerned about civil liberties, about the way that Morsi was nibbling away at the new freedoms that had been won, arresting bloggers and indicting television personalities for criticizing him, and kind of attempting to pack the courts and the legislature with his guys. I think the workers, in some ways, felt that they were in a worse situation than they had been under Mubarak when the complaint was poor pay and late pay. I saw one set of workers from a textile mill who said that under Morsi they were afraid the mill would close altogether. So it wasn't a matter of getting better benefits; it was a matter of the survival of their jobs.
And we've spoken about this a bit on Ring of Fire, but what really is stunning about what you had told me about at the time you were there is just sort of the size of this movement. I mean, we're talking about millions upon millions of people who signed this petition. Nearly a third of the country. Is that right?
Well, the Tomorrow the Rebellion movement claims that it gathered 22 million signatures demanding a recall election for the president. The population of Egypt is roughly 82 million, so that would be about a quarter of the population. But remember, Egypt is a very young population, so the electorate is much smaller. So it's a very substantial proportion of the electorate. Morsi was only elected by 13 million votes against 12 for his rival a year ago. So almost twice as many people petitioned him to leave as voted for him.
And we should make clear that the I mean, tell me about the dynamic of how the military sort of moved in here, because
Yeah.
it wasn't, there was no calls necessarily for the military to step in, but it was, or to oust Morsi per se, but it clearly seemed to be welcomed by members of Tamarot.
Yes, the rebellion movement was a civil movement. It was simply asking for a do-over. It wanted a mulligan for the nation of Egypt, that Morsi would not serve out a 4-year term, but would either resign or agree to run again to keep his office. And so there was no suggestion from the side of the youth of a military intervention. In fact, many of the youth involved in this movement had campaigned vigorously to get the military out of politics. And so, however, when they gathered in their millions in the street on June 30th and after to demand Morsi's departure, and it was very clear that the president was not going to voluntarily meet their demands in any way, and he insisted that there were only small crowds of 100,000 out. Then the military became afraid of a polarization, of faction fighting in the streets between Muslim brothers and the rebellion movement, and stepped in on July 3rd to make a coup. That move of the military hadn't been expected, hadn't been demanded, but since the alternative seemed to be stuck with Morsi and his policies, many of the protesters, at least initially, welcomed that step.
And you recounted to me just how ubiquitous the petition signing was when you were there. That you got one from it. It seemed across all sort of social strata. You had told me a story, in a for fearing that we were getting into Thomas Friedman's story, but you did tell me a story about a cab driver.
Well, we have a rule in journalism that we don't convey things from our cab drivers ordinarily, but this is a systemic thing, because it was very clear to me that the cab drivers were handing out the petitions to all of their riders if they seemed inclined to accept one. So I'm actually describing one of the mechanisms by which these petitions were spread around. There's quite a lot of traffic in Cairo, a city of 20 million, a lot of cab drivers. So it was one of the ways the petitions were being handed out. It was the cabbie would chat you up and see if you were amenable, and then would give you one. What I discovered was that when I left the petition in my hotel room, the next day when I saw the guys who cleaned the room, they were just beaming and very happy. They said, "Oh, we see you're supporting us." The workers in the hotel industry were behind this, and I think a year ago they would likely have been Morsi voters. I perceived, and this is anecdotal, I know, but I perceived a real sea change against Morsi among all strata of Egyptians that I had something to do with.
And could you tell that this sea change was it? I mean, and maybe we're just splitting hairs here, and it's very difficult to weigh these things. But was it the economic failures, or was it the civil society aspects of it? What was the straw that broke the camel's back, as it were?
Well, I think that the two things worked together. The fact that Morsi didn't manage to get a handle on the economy caused him to lose potential supporters among the poor and the working class, who are very sensitive to any kind of price inflation in staples. The cost of just imported food, and Egypt imports the majority of its food now, or of diesel fuel, is maybe 30% more expensive this year than last. So the Brotherhood just became unpopular because they seemed like they didn't have a handle on this.
And you there's a story that came out in the Times. We're recording this on Thursday, but there was a story that came out in the Times today that talked about that there's been a sudden improvement in sort of in Egypt in terms of both sort of like economic, but also there's more police on the streets. And tell me, like, what were the institutions that were creating, or in your mind, and in your reporting, did you find that there were institutions that were sort of creating headwinds for Morsi on the ground?
Well, there were somewhat mysterious fuel shortages, which couldn't easily be explained because, although fuel has been expensive historically in the past year, there's no particular reason for which you would have shortages in Egypt. People said it had to do with the refining. And it is possible that the army controlled the distribution of petroleum, and it just throttled it a little bit in order to create dissatisfaction. That's certainly a theory that's being traded in Egypt. The police, on the other hand, you can't really see a conspiracy here. The police under Morsi were very unhappy. They had spent the previous 30 years opposing the Muslim Brotherhood and arresting them and trying to keep them from becoming powerful. So there was just very bad blood between the police and the Muslim Brotherhood. The police weren't very happy to have the Brotherhood in charge of them. And indeed, the Brotherhood allowed some policemen who were Muslim fundamentalists to begin wearing beards and kind of having a public presence in the police. So that they maybe sloughed off is not so hard to understand. And now that there's been a military coup, that they should recover their esprit de corps suddenly is also not hard to understand. But that doesn't need to be orchestrated. That's just a matter of institutional attitudes.
And one of the things that you talked about was the cash reserves and the dynamic on how that impacted the value of the Egyptian pound, which is their currency. Walk us through that.
Well, the Egyptian pound was originally like in the East Bloc systems, it was a controlled currency. But in 2002, the Egyptian government started letting it float in value against other currencies. But it was a managed float. If it began losing value, the central bank would intervene, would buy pounds and defend its value. And they were able to do this because the Egyptian tourism industry and some of its commodities had allowed them to build up $32 billion in foreign currency reserves, and they just released those against the pound when they needed to. But because of the revolution and then the bad economic year under Morsi, the failure of tourism as an industry because of the tumult, and I think also the Muslim Brotherhood's lack of interest in the tourist industry because they're kind of Puritans and don't approve of many of the activities of tourists. All of this caused the foreign currency reserves to plummet to less than half. I think it got down to 13 billion. And so the central bank was not able to defend the value of the pound in the way that it used to. As a result, the pound is much weaker against the dollar. Since Egypt imports a lot of things, including the majority of its food and its fuel, this has caused staples to skyrocket. For ordinary people, paying 30% more for your food or your fuel is really painful. So this is part of the story here. Is part of Morsi's failure was a financial failure.
And according to the Times, by Wednesday of this week, a total of $12 billion had flowed in from Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Kuwait, I guess presumably to sort of pad these reserves. What do you make of that?
Yes, well, that was another problem that Morsi had, which is that the Brotherhood is viewed in the Gulf by many of the Gulf rulers, at least, as a cult and a political cult that's dangerous and revolutionary and maybe, God forbid, Republican in its attitudes. And so the emirs, who are monarchs, were afraid of it. The United Arab Emirates conducted almost open warfare against the Brotherhood. They arrested 89 putative members and tried them. The Saudis were obviously not very happy to have lost Mubarak, whom they considered a reliable friend and protector. and the Kuwait monarchy faces its own Muslim Brotherhood movement, with which it has very bad relations. So Egypt had depended for support and aid on the Gulf oil monarchies for a long time, and in return it provides them with the security umbrella because it has a good army. But that Morsi lost that relationship. He did get money from Qatar, but overall I think he just wasn't popular enough in the Gulf to get the foreign aid, whereas now that the Brotherhood is out, the foreign aid is just flowing in from the Gulf monarchies.
And what do you make of the claim by Naguib Sawiris, who is apparently an Egyptian billionaire, who claims that he had funded Tamarod? He said he was quoted as saying, "Tamarod didn't even know it was me." Tamarod being Arabic for rebellion, and this is the movement that was seeking to have a recall, if you will, of Morsi. He says they don't know it was me. I'm not ashamed of it. What does that tell us about sort of the establishment's role, I guess, the Egyptian establishment's role in sort of undercutting the Morsi regime, and how relevant will that be going forward?
Well, it seemed pretty clear that the Tamarod or rebellion movement wouldn't have gained as much support if it hadn't been joined by old Mubarak supporters who were unhappy with the new situation. It was a coalition encompassing many different kinds of people. Naguib Sawiris is a Coptic Christian billionaire. He was known as a reformer under Mubarak to some extent. Some people associate him with Mubarak's regime and the corruption of it, but it wasn't as if he was Mubarak's right-hand man. And he's known as a grandstander, and I wouldn't pay too much attention to his claim that he funded this movement. For one thing, Xeroxing off petitions and spreading them around is not expensive, and I think it was mainly the sweat work of the young people that made this movement a success. I don't think that secret funding would have mattered much.
And where throughout this, I mean, and people should also know that the military controls much of the economy, or certainly far more than I think we associate with military in this country. And I don't mean in terms of like the actual expenditures, but they actually had the sort of they have the levers on a lot of different industries and services. And how much? I mean, where were they during this? I mean, were they actively pursuing something like this, or just exactly where were they as you sort of map where the different constituencies were leading up to Morsi's overthrow?
Yeah, well, the military in Egypt is a kind of big corporation that owns lots of industries. It sells bottled water, by the way, and all kinds. It has sugar factories and so forth. But we think that Morsi more or less promised them economic autonomy, and we don't think that he moved on their assets. And that was one of the reasons that the coup was a little bit of a surprise, is we thought that there'd been kind of a pact between the Brotherhood and the military. So I don't think that the main reason the military moved against Morsi was because of his threat to their economic interests. In fact, he was friendly to business. I think it was a cultural thing. The military is relatively secular. It views the Brotherhood as a manipulative cult. I think the Brotherhood was trying to promote more Muslim fundamentalist officers within the officer corps. That was a threat to the others. And so I think it had more to do with the corporate solidarity of the military than anything else.
Aside from the part that the United States is still determining whether or not this was a coup versus a revolution, and relative to the funding, what happens with the Muslim Brotherhood now? I mean, is there a concern that there's been a fundamental sort of attack on the notion of democracy, and that the idea of participating in the political process has now been sort of swept off the table as a viable option for the Muslim Brotherhood?
Yeah, well, the good thing about the Morsi win in June of 2012 was that it might have been a sign. that Muslim fundamentalism was going in a democratic direction, was willing to play the parliamentary game, and the alternative to that is to become radicalized and to move towards Al-Qaeda. So a lot of us who observed this area were very happy that the Brotherhood was drawn into democratic politics, but they behaved badly once in office. They used the government for patronage for their group and excluded other people. Now, in turn, they're being excluded and hunted down, actually, and imprisoned. And so this is a very dangerous moment in which the Brotherhood could become radicalized. On the other hand, this happened to Turkish fundamentalists in 1997. Their prime minister was made to step down by the military, and their response was to become more democratic and more acceptable to the electorate. They reformulated themselves and came back. So I would say that the Brotherhood has a choice here of nursing its wounds and radicalizing, or of finding a way actually to play the democratic game instead of only seeming to.
So you have the sort of the Turkey paradigm and maybe the Algerian paradigm that's on the other side of that. Which one? I mean, I don't want to force you to hazard a guess, but let me force you to hazard a guess. Which way do you think that's going to go?
Well, I think the Brotherhood is very disciplined, and it has a lot of smart people in it. And I think once the shock of what has happened begins to wear off and the realities sink in, I think there are going to be at least large sections of the Brotherhood that try to reformulate things. I think someone like Issam El-Arian, who has been an important figure in Muslim Brotherhood politics and a kind of guru to the younger Muslim brothers, is somebody who might try to reformulate things to move in a more genuinely liberal direction. And on the other hand, there are sections of the Brotherhood that were already, not very far from Al-Qaeda, and those guys could start being violent. So Egypt is in for a hard ride, I think.
Professor Juan Cole, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks so much for having me on, Sam.